Alright guys, in this video we're going to talk about and build a project with React Admin, which is a tool that I've used for a while, and I actually did a crash course on React Admin a few years ago, but a lot has changed since then, so I wanted to give you guys an updated version. And we're going to just first look at some slides, literally like 3 or 4 minutes, just to give you a better idea of what React Admin is, and then we're going to just jump in and we're going to create an admin area for a blog using JSON Server as a backend API. All right, so let's jump into it. All right, so like I said, I just want to spend just a couple minutes talking about React Admin and what it is. So it's an open source front-end framework built on React, and it was created and is maintained by a company called Marmalab. And it's designed for creating data-driven applications like admin dashboards and B2B interfaces. And it offers great looking UI components based on material design. You can create anything from simple CRUD apps, create, read, update, and delete, to complex business management systems, and it adapts to projects of all sizes. And one standout feature of React Admin is its low learning curve. So if you're familiar with React, you're going to find React Admin incredibly intuitive to work with, even if you're new to React. The framework it provides enough structure and pre-built components to get you up and running very quickly. So it's great for rapid development. And it's also back-end agnostic, so you can build your interface on top of any API, whether it uses REST or GraphQL, whether it's built with Express or Laravel or Django, doesn't matter at all. And React Admin doesn't use fetch directly. It actually uses something called a data provider object, and it uses that to interface with your API. So let's talk a little bit about data providers. So these are objects that expose a predefined interface that allows React Admin to query any API in a normalized way. And you can think of a data provider as an adapter or a bridge between your React Admin interface, so your front-end UI, and the back-end API. And it handles communication like data fetching, creating new records, updating existing ones, deleting records, all that stuff. And there's literally dozens of different data providers that you can use for certain types of projects. For instance, there's a simple REST API provider, there's a GraphQL provider, there's even a specific provider for JSON Server, which is the service that we're going to be using in our demo. And of course, you can also write your own data providers, which I actually may do a video on at some point. Now, if you were to write your own provider, there's just a few methods that you need to implement, and they're all pretty self-explanatory. You know, if you want to get a list or a single resource, if you want to create, update, delete resources, you can also add other custom methods as well. And like I said, we're going to be using the JSON Server provider, but regardless of which provider you use and which type of backend you use, the rest of this stuff will be used in the same way as far as our front end, as far as React Admin and the components and all that stuff goes. Now, as far as the basic building blocks with React Admin, we have a resource component, which defines CRUD routes for a given API resource, whether that's posts or users or products. You have a list, which of course displays a list of records. Create, which displays a form to create a record. Edit will display an edit form, and show to display a record in read-only mode. So we'll be working with these basic building blocks and a ton of other stuff, but I don't want to spend too much time in slides, so let's get right into it and let's start working with React Admin. All right, guys, so we're going to create our admin UI in a second, but I just wanted to just briefly talk about the data we're using, the back end. So we're using a service called JSON Placeholder, which is at jsonplaceholder.typecode.com. It's powered by JSON Server, and it basically gives us a fake REST API, a complete back end to work with CRUD functionality, create, read, update, and delete. And we have multiple resources we can use. We have posts. So if I click on posts, it goes to JSON placeholder typecode/posts, and it gives us about 100 of them with an ID, title, body, and a user ID that pertains to a user in the users collection. So now you can see we have all these different users. So this is the data we're going to be working with, and you can make GET requests, posts to add, put to update, delete to delete. It doesn't persist in the database, obviously, because they don't want people just deleting everything or creating a ton of posts, but it does make a successful request and send you a successful response as if it were a real REST API. Okay, so that's what we'll be using, and there's actually a data provider that we can use with React Admin to work with this service. Now, in reality, you'd have your own API, but the way you work with it as far as in React Admin is going to be the same. So you're going to use the same components like resources and data grids and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. We need to run npm init react admin. So you do have to have Node.js installed, and you need npm, of course. So let's run npm init. Make sure you go into a folder where you want to create this, and then react-admin, and then I'm just going to call it react admin demo, but you can call it whatever you'd like. Now it's going to ask us about the data provider, and I showed you a quick screen that had dozens of data providers, so this is by no means all of them, but just a couple that can get you started. So fake REST, which is a client-side in-memory data provider, JSON server, which is what we're using. It's based on the JSON server API. Simple REST, so if you have a simple REST API, and none if you want to configure it yourself. Now I'm going to choose JSON server, so let's hit that. And then you can also have auth providers for authentication. And I'm going to choose none here. I'm going to show you how to use it, but I want to do it from scratch rather than choosing it here. So I'm going to choose none. And then if you want to add your first resource like post or user or whatever, you can do it here, but I'm going to just hit enter and leave it blank because I'm going to show you how to do it within the app. All right, and then I'm using npm. If you want to use yarn, that's fine as well. So now it's just going to generate our React application. All right, so now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and just open it up with VS Code. So I'm going to say code react admin demo. If you want to use a different editor, you can, that's fine. And I'm going to open up the integrated terminal here, and I'm going to run the server with npm run dev. And it's going to run on port 5173 by default. If I click that and open it, it's just going to show us this welcome page. All right, now before we do anything, I just want to kind of go over the structure here. So if we look at the package.json, it's very similar to just if you were to set up a React app with Vite. It uses the Vite server. We have npm run dev, which we just ran. npm run build will build your production site, and then you can serve that with serve. You have type checking, you have linting with ESLint, and formatting with Prettier. So if we look at the regular dependencies, of course, we have React and React DOM. In addition to that, we have React Admin, and we have the JSON server data provider that we selected. And then just a bunch of dev dependencies for TypeScript and ESLint and Prettier. We are using TypeScript, so we're using TSX files, but we're not really writing any TypeScript. So if you have no knowledge of TypeScript, that's absolutely fine. And then there's just a bunch of config files for things like Vite, TypeScript, Prettier, ESLint, and then if we look in the source, we have our index TSX, which is the entry point, and looks just like any other React SPA. Bringing in React DOM, we're passing in the root element, we're rendering the main app component, which is right here, app.tsx. Now in here is where React admin kind of takes over. You can see what we're exporting from our app component is this admin component. That's like the root of React admin. And it takes in a layout, which we have right here, layout TSX. If you wanted to add something to this or, add styling or components or whatever, you could. And then we also have passed in a data provider. In our case, if we look at dataprovider.ts, we're using the RA data JSON server provider. And all that consists of is just exporting this function, passing in the URL, which is in the .env. And it's the same exact URL that I was using here. So if we go to /posts, so we're using the same exact data. Again, we can't persist the data. Like if we add a new post, it's not going to really get added to the database, but it will make a successful request, so it mimics a real API. So in that app TSX, you'll see this resource component, right? So in the admin component, it expects to have at least one resource. So let's add a resource for posts. So we got to give it a name, and you want that name to correspond with your endpoint, which in our case is posts. All right. Then we can add different views like create, edit, list, which in our case is going to list the posts. And for now, usually you'd set this to your own component, but for now I'm going to set it to the list guesser. So it has this concept of guessers, and they just kind of guess the config for the table columns and stuff like that, or the field names, and it's based on the data that's fetched. So if we look at our project now, we have this post table or data grid, and it has the user, the ID, the title, and the body. So it's getting that from the data it's fetching. All right, and it has pagination down here. We can export as a CSV file. We have dark light mode. So just by adding that one line of code, right, just that one resource, we have all this functionality. And just to get something from your API and show it like this and have pagination and implement a mode toggler, that's quite a bit of code. So you can see how high level React admin is and how easy it is to use. And you can really customize this stuff. Now, the guesser isn't meant to be used in production. What's really cool is that if we look at the console, it actually gives us the code to use to make our own list component. So I'm going to just grab this import and this export here and copy it. And then we're going to go and create our own component. So in source, I'm going to create a folder called pages. And then in pages, I'm going to have a folder called posts. And anything that has to do with posts will go in here. And I'm just structuring it how I want. If you wanted to structure your folders a different way, you could. There's no convention or anything, nothing you're supposed to do as far as how you structure this stuff or how you name it. So I'm going to create a new file in posts called post-list.tsx. All right, and then what we'll do is just paste in what I just copied from the console. Now, I prefer to have my exports at the bottom as default, so I'm going to get rid of that export, and then down at the bottom, I'm going to say export default, and then post list. Okay, now to use this, right now it's not doing anything, but to use it, we can then bring it into our app TSX. So let's say import post list, and then instead of list guesser, we want to replace that with our post list, and we can then just get rid of that list guesser. If I save it, it's going to look the same way, but now we have control over it, right? And one of the things I want to do is the users, I want to move that to the end. So I'm going to move that down to the bottom, save it, and now the user is at the end of the table or the data grid. Okay. Now, as far as this code goes, the list component that wraps everything, that is what actually fetches the data through the provider, and then we're using a data grid to display that data. However, you're not limited to just this data grid and having it look this way. There's a lot of other components you can use. There's other themes and layouts. It doesn't have to look like this, but I just want to keep it simple, so I'm just using a basic data grid. And one example I can give you is the simple list. So if we bring that in, I'm just going to temporarily get rid of the data grid. You still want to be within the list component because that's what basically provides the data. And let's say we want a simple list, and this takes in a primary text, and primary text is going to be a function that takes in a record, and you have access to that record, which in this case is a post. So let's say we want this to show the record.title for the primary text. Right, and then we have secondary text, same thing. I'm going to pass in, say, record, and we want to display record.body for the secondary. So if I save that, we take a look, now it looks completely different, right? We have a list with a primary text title and a secondary text body. Pagination still works, right? So it's just another way to display the data, but I'm going to just revert it back to the data grid, just because it fits more information. Okay, so now we have the data grid back. Now we can customize this. Like one simple thing we could do is, let's say instead of title, we want this to say post title. We can then add a label to the text field. So we'll say label, set that to, let's say, post title. Come back over here, reload, and then now it says post title, right? If we want to change the way that the data is displayed, like let's say for the body, you might have 10, 20 plus paragraphs of text. You don't want to show that all in these tables. So why don't we truncate it? Let's use, we're going to use something called function field, which allows you to really customize the data that you're displaying. So instead of a text field, which just simply displays the text or displays the data straight up, like if we look at the ID, title, and body, that's exactly what's showing here. There is a reference field for users, and that's why it's showing the user name here and not the user ID. Because remember, in the posts, we only have the user ID, not the name. But what this reference field does is it references the users table by the user ID, and by default, it shows the name. Okay, but again, this body, what I want to do is use function field, and let's set a label, and we'll set the label to excerpt, and then it takes in render, and render is going to be a function that takes in a record, just like the simple list I showed you. And then we can do whatever we want with that record, and that record has the title, the body, etc. I want the body, but I want to truncate it. So what I'll do is let's actually use backticks here, and then we're going to take the record dot body, and then I'm just going to use substring to shorten it. Let's say we want from 0 to 50, and then I just want to add 3 dots at the end. So now if I save that, we take a look, now the body is now an excerpt. I changed the label, and it's only showing the first 50 characters and then showing the dots. So you can change it up to show whatever you want using that data. Now another thing I want to show you is how to add style. Now you can add your own CSS file, and you can take any of the classes, use your elements here and look at the classes, and you can change things in a CSS file. But if you want to add to an individual element or component, you can use the SX prop, which is very similar to React's style prop. So let's say we want to add some padding to this header right here, this header cell. So I'm going to go into the DataGrid, and I'm going to add a prop of SX, which works like the style prop. So you want to have your double curly braces. And then you can put your CSS selector. So I know what I want is a class, and it's called RA DataGrid dash header cell. So that's the class I want. And then I want to set some padding on it. So I'm going to set padding to, let's say, 16 pixels. Save that, and now you can see that there's some spacing in the header. All right, now another thing I want to show you is the expand. So I can basically have these rows have an arrow where it can expand and show more content. For instance, you might want to show the whole body. So let's go to the list, and we're going to pass in, I'm sorry, not the list, the data grid, and let's say expand. And I'm going to set this to a component called, we'll call it post panel. I know I haven't created it yet, but we're going to create it right now. So right here, let's say const post panel, set that to a function, and we're just going to return from this for now just a div and just say hello. Okay, now post panel is being passed into expand, so if I come back over here, we have these arrows, and if I click it, it expands and it shows hello for all of these. But what if I want to show, like I said, the whole body? In that case, we can use a hook called use record context, which will allow us to use just that, the record context and data wherever we want. So in this case, in the post panel. So let's bring in use record context, and then I'm going to go right above that return. Let's say const record, set that equal to use record context, and then I should have access to record dot, and then I want, actually I'm going to use the optional chaining here, and then dot body. So now if I click on the expand, I see the entire body. So we got the excerpt here, but we have all the text in the drop downs. All right. Now that's not something I want to keep. I just wanted to show you how that worked. So I'm going to get rid of the expand and the SX and get rid of the post panel. All right. So now what I'd like to do is show you how to add more resources, because right now we just have posts, but what if we also want to add users? So what I'm going to do is create a new file, a new folder rather, in Pages called users. And then in users, let's create a file called user-list.tsx. Okay, and then for this, I guess we could probably just type this out. It's pretty quick. So I'm going to use my React Simple Snippets extension and just do SFC, and then we're going to call this user list. And it's going to be similar to the post list, where we're going to use the list component, and we need to make sure we bring that in from React admin. And then within the list, we're going to have a data grid. So let's also bring that in. And in the data grid, we'll have our text fields. And this text field is going to have a source of ID. And then I'll just copy that down a few times. So we have the ID. We have, actually, do I want the ID? No. Yeah, we'll keep the ID. And then let's do the name, the email, and the phone. Okay, and this data pertains to the user data. So if I go to JSON placeholder and then /users, so we can get any of this data here, right? Because we're using that data provider. But I think that that's good. Name, email, phone, ID. So let's go ahead and save that. Now we need to go back to our app TSX and let's bring that in. So import user list. And then what we'll do is copy this resource down, add a resource for users. And for the list, we want to use the user list. Now, automatically, we should see users over here on the side. And if I click that, now we have a data grid with our users, with pagination, with an export, with delete. I didn't mention that either. So we can have these checkboxes and we can click delete. It's not going to stay deleted because, again, you can't persist the data with this API, but it works in theory. So we have posts and users. Now let's create a show view, right? I want to be able to click on one of these and show a read-only page with the post data. So what we can do is go into Pages and then Posts. Actually, before we do that, we can use the show guesser. So yeah, just like we did the list guesser. So in the resource for posts, let's say show, and let's set that to the show guesser. And just by doing that, if I now click on this, it takes me to the show page where it has the user ID, title, body. All right, but we don't want to use this in production. So what we can do is look at the console, and it gives us an example of the code that we can use to create this ourselves. And again, you're not limited to this. You can display it in any way you want. In fact, if you go to the Marmalab homepage, I mean, you can see some of these examples here. No, I don't want source. I want demo. So like look at this. This is all custom. You know, this is React admin. Go to this demo. So an e-commerce dashboard or whatever. So you can really customize it. I'm just keeping it very basic. I know this isn't the best looking, but the functionality it gives you is crazy for the amount of code that you write. So yeah, we'll copy that, and then we'll create a show view. So let's go into Pages, Posts. We'll create post-show.tsx and paste that in. And again, I just like to export it at the bottom, just kind of an OCD thing. So export default, and we want post show. And then what we can do is bring that in. We can get rid of the show guesser, and then we can bring, let's say, import post show, and then replace the show guesser with post show. And now it's the same thing, right? If I click on it, it shows me that show view. Okay, and we can do the same thing for users. So if we go to users and create a new file called user-show.tsx, and I'll just copy the post show, and then we'll change this and this to user show. And of course we don't want this, the reference here. We'll get that out. We'll do the ID, name, email, and phone. Okay, and then in the app TSX, we'll bring in the user show and pass in here show. I know I'm going kind of fast, but it's really easy stuff. So user show, and now if I click on that, now we can see the user view. Also, if I go back to posts, notice now the users actually have they're blue with an underline, and it's a link to go to that user page. Okay, so not only can I go to the post page from here, but I can also click on the user and go to the user page. So really cool. Now let's create an edit for the posts. So we have an edit guesser, so we can use that to kind of see what it'll look like. So let's say edit, set that to edit guesser temporarily. And now we don't have an edit button. We can create one, and I will in a minute, but the way we can get to it right now is to go to the show, and now there's an edit button here. If I click on that, now we have the form. Okay, but again, this is using the guesser, so we're going to want to just grab this, and let's create in pages posts. We'll say post-edit.tsx. Paste that in, and I'm just going to bring this down here. Default post edit, and then back in the app TSX, we can get rid of the edit guesser. We don't need that. And let's import post edit, and then change this to post edit. And we should get the same thing. Okay, so we're able to have an edit page, and I can change the user. So this is a reference field, so I can change the user if I want, and then I can change, title, body. I can save it. Now it gets updated, but it doesn't stay updated because, again, it doesn't persist. But I want to show you how we can add an edit button as well on the list page. So, and it's very, very easy. All we have to do is go to, let's close this stuff up. Let's go to the post list, and let's import edit button. And then I'm going to put that as the last thing in the data grid. So edit button, save that, and now we have an edit button. So if I click this one, I can edit that post. Now what about create? Let's do that. Let's go to posts. Let's create post-create.tsx. And we'll just type this out because it's pretty simple. So I'm going to do SFC. And let's call this post create. And we're going to want to wrap this in create. Okay, and then in that we want to have simple form, just like we use for the edit. Again, make sure you bring this stuff in. And in simple form, let's have a reference input to the user so that we can select the user. So reference, not error, reference input. And we're going to add the source is going to be user ID. And the reference is going to be users. Okay, and then we'll also have the title, which is going to go in a text input. Actually, wait a minute, text input is going to be self-closing. Bring it in. Okay, and then we just want to add a source of title, and then let's also add one for the body. Now for the body, I want it to be bigger, so let's say multi-line, and then we can even specify the number of rows. Let's do 5. All right, so that's our create view. So let's go back into app TSX, and let's bring in post create, and then just simply add on to the resource, create set that to post create. And now what that did is it added this create button. If I click that, now we have a create form. I can choose the user and I can save. Now it's going to give you an error because what happened is it makes a successful request and we get a successful response, but it doesn't actually get added. So when it goes to get that new resource, that new post, it's not there. So we get an error. So that's to be expected. All right, so yeah, I mean, that's CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. If you want to add the create and edit to the users, you can just simply add them here and then just, plug them into the resource. But I want to move on to filters, search and filters. And this is super easy. So let's open the post list, and I just want to have a search form so I can search for things in the title and so on. So I'm going to bring in a text input, and then I also want to be able to filter by user, so I'm going to bring in a reference input. Because remember, the user, that's not part of the post. It has it's part of users, so we need to reference users. Now, instead of returning a list directly from the post list, what I'm going to do is add a curly brace here, and then a return, and then add our ending curly brace here. Okay, and then I'm going to go above the return because what we need to do is pass in to list. We need to pass in filters, and I'm going to create a post filters array. So let's go right here and let's say const post filters, set that to an array, and it's going to be an array of inputs. So the first one is going to be the text input. And I just want to give that a source of Q for query. Okay, and then we'll give it a label of search. Now, if I do that, what happens is it creates this add filter. If I click that, I get a drop down with search, and then if I check off search, then I get the input. So I would rather have it always there, because if I reload, well, I guess it's still there, but if you first come to the site, it's not going to be there. But you can add always on like that. You don't want to set it equal to anything, just always on. Now it's just there, and you can search for whatever. All right. Now I'd also like to add a user filter. That's where this reference input comes in. So within these brackets, just make sure you put a comma after that input, and then let's do reference input, and for the source we want that to be user ID, and let's give it a label of just user. And I don't want this to be always on, so I'm not going to use that. I do need to add a reference though to users, and now we should have add filter. If I click on user, then I can narrow it down to whatever user. All right, so as simple as that to have search and filters. Now, another small thing I'd like to change is the icons, right? The post and users icons here are the same, and we have automatically with React Admin, you have material icons available. So in the app.tsx, I'm going to go ahead and bring in, let's say, import article icon, and that's going to be from @MUI/icons material/article. I want to bring that one in as well as the person icon. So let's change that to person, change this to person, right? And then what we can do is for the resource for the posts, I'm going to say icon, set that to article icon. And then for the users icon, I'll set that one to the person icon. Save that and check it out. And now there's different icons. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is how to create a custom homepage. Because right now, if you come to your homepage, which in my case is just localhost 5173, it just takes me to the post table. You might want to have just a welcome page or something like that. So I will create something very simple. So I'm going to go into Pages and create a file called homepage.tsx. And what you call the file and stuff doesn't matter. You can put it wherever you want, call it whatever you want. And I'm just going to do some copying and pasting here. So we can bring in these components from Material UI, so card content, typography, box, and then let me see, I'm just going to grab this homepage component real quick. Okay, so we just have a box with some styling. We're using the SX prop, making it a flex box, centering everything, and then we have a card content, we have a heading, and a paragraph. So very, very simple stuff. And there's just certain props you can pass in, like typography, you can pass in a variant and a component and so on. And to use that, we need to go to our app.tsx and bring it in. So we want to bring in our home page, and then that gets plugged in to the admin component. So in the admin component, let's add dashboard. That's the prop that you want to pass it in as, and say home page. So now if I go to just localhost 5173, now I see my little message here, welcome to the dashboard. Okay, it's also a link over here as well. And then I can go to posts or users, whatever. All right, so that's how you can create a home page. Now, the last thing I want to show you how to do is to create an authentication provider. And we're going to do something very simple and just have a username and password that has to have the username of admin and the password of password. But obviously, you would have a real authentication system that you would integrate into your provider. So in the source folder, we're going to create a file called auth, let's say authprovider.ts. And I'm going to import auth provider from React admin. And then that's uppercase A. And then we need to export, let's say export const auth provider. And we'll give it a type of auth provider that we just brought in. Set that equal to an object. And then in that object, we're going to have some different functions that do different things or run at certain times. So this first one runs, we'll say runs when user attempts to log in. So we're going to say login and set that to a function. And what this will take in is an object with a username and password. Okay, and then in the function body here, basically our validation is going to check to see if the username is admin and the password is password. And then a successful login is going to set that username to local storage. So let's say if the username is equal to admin and the password is equal to password, then we're going to take local storage and we're going to set an item, and we'll just set the key we'll set to username, and then the value will be the username. Right, and then what this needs to return is a promise. It needs to return promise resolve the promise if it's successful and reject it if it's not. So in this case, we're going to return promise.resolve. Okay, now if this isn't correct, right, if the login is bad, then we're going to return, say, promise.reject. Okay, and then let's see what's going on here. Is missing the following properties, auth provider. Yeah, so it's just we haven't added the logout yet. But yeah, so very basic. Obviously, you would integrate your own authentication system here, but we're just doing something very simple. So under login, let's add our log out. So right here, we're going to put a comma and then log out. Okay, and then all we want our logout to do is remove, let's say remove username from local storage. So we're going to say local storage dot remove item and remove the username. And then we want to return promise.resolve. So that's our logout. Then we also want to have a check error Actually, let me put a comment here. It's pretty obvious, but let's just say runs when log out. Okay, put a comma here. Then this is going to runs when API returns an error. So this is going to be called check error. Oops, check error. All right, and then what that's going to take in, this check error, is going to be an object with status, and the type for that object status, that's going to be a number. All right, now in check error, we're going to check that status and see if that's a 401. 401 is unauthorized. And then we want to also check if it's a status of 403. So if it's either one of those, then we know that they're unauthorized. And if that's so, then let's remove the username from local storage. So local storage dot remove item and remove item of username. And then we want to return a promise reject. So let's say return promise dot reject, right? And then underneath that, so if there is no status of 401 or 403, then we want to resolve. So return promise promise dot resolve. Okay, so that's our check error. Then we have our check auth. So this is gonna, let's say, runs when the user navigates to a new location to check for auth, for authentication. So let's say check auth. Okay, now for check auth, we're gonna return success if username is in local storage, right? So if we go to a page where you need to be authenticated, it's going to check to see if it's in local storage, the username. If it is, then we'll resolve. If not, then we'll reject. So let's say return and say local storage dot get item. We want to check for username, and then I'm using a ternary here. So if that's true, then let's do promise dot resolve. So you're authenticated, right? And then if it's not true, then promise dot reject dot reject. And that's it. And then one more. So this will, let's say, runs when user navigates to a new location to check for permissions or rules, right? Because you might be logged in, but you might have certain permissions for different users or different roles, and you want to check that. And that's going to be called get permission or get permissions. And for that, we're not going to do any logic here. I'm just going to resolve. So promise.resolve. I just want you to know all the different functions. Okay, so yeah, that should do it. Let's save that. And now to use it, we need to go into our app.tsx. We're going to import the, the auth provider, the lowercase version. Okay, and then we just want to add that to the admin. So right here, let's say auth, and let's set that equal to the auth provider. Sorry, that should be auth provider, not auth. Okay, now let's go to the home page. And we have a login. Okay, so right now, everything, you need to be logged in to do anything. And I'm going to just type in anything, just whatever. I get authentication failed, please try again. I'm going to do admin and password sign in, and then that works. So now I'm logged in. All right, and you see the little user icon here as well with the logout. If I log out, it clears that local storage item, brings me back to the login. Okay, and again, you would have your own authentication logic here. These are just the functions that you would use, right? Obviously, this stuff would be different. But, I mean, it's all put together it's all there for you to take advantage of, and just really easy to use, and doesn't take much code at all to create a really cool system to manage your API, manage your resources. All right, guys, so hopefully you enjoyed this. I will have the code in the description. So if you want to create something of your own and you want to use this as a resource, you can. If you want to add on to it, of course, you can do that. But that's it, and thanks for watching.